Okay, let's jump straight into something that's probably, well, crossed all our minds at some point.
Hmm.
Picture this. You and a friend, you're watching the sunset, and you're just struck by these, intense, fiery red streaks across the horizon.
Right.
But
Beautiful.
then later you're talking, and your friend keeps mentioning the brilliant gold colors, and they hardly even bring up the red that you thought was so amazing.
Yeah, that definitely makes you pause, doesn't it? Like, were we even watching the same sky?
Exactly. That feeling. It highlights this really profound question, I think, about experience.
Absolutely. How much of what we perceive is, actual objective reality
Mhm.
versus how much is, well, shaped by our own internal world?
Precisely. And that's really what we're diving deep into today. Each of us lives inside our own brain, this incredibly complex and totally individual filter for everything.
It's true. There's no backup system,
Yeah.
right? No external check on what your brain is telling you.
None at all. We're essentially, you could say, alone in our perception. It's a rather staggering thought when you dwell on it, this sort of inherent solitude in how we grasp reality.
It really is. And our goal here in this exploration is to get a handle on how our individual brains actually construct these unique realities.
And crucially, how we manage to build bridges, how we create shared understanding despite those fundamental differences.
Exactly. We're going to uncover some, I think, truly fascinating insights. Hopefully, it'll offer you, the listener, a fresh perspective on your own experiences and maybe how you connect with others.
Okay, so let's start with the machinery itself, our brains. We're talking, what, roughly 86 billion neurons.
Roughly, yes. And each one forming these unbelievably intricate, constantly changing networks.
And these connections, they aren't generic, are they? They're shaped by our genes, obviously, but also development and just everything we've ever experienced.
That's the key. No two brains are truly identical, not even in identical twins. The wiring is unique.
That neurological individuality,
Mm,
that has to be central to why our perceptions differ so much.
it makes perfect sense. If the hardware is unique, the software, our perception, is going to run uniquely too.
And perception isn't just passive, like a camera recording.
Not at all. That's a crucial point. Dr. Anil Seth put it really well, didn't he? He said, we don't just passively perceive the world, we actively generate it.
Right. The world we experience comes as much from the inside out as from the outside in.
Exactly. That inside out part is huge for understanding your own perception.
Okay, let's unpack that inside out idea a bit more, because this is where it gets really, really interesting, I think.
It is.
It's not just light hitting our eyes and boom, we see. Our brain is actively building our visual world. It's using past experiences, expectations.
Even just where you happen to be focusing your attention right now.
Ah, attention. Which brings us to that classic experiment, the basketball and the gorilla one.
Oh, yes, a fantastic illustration of this active construction. Can you remind everyone how that surprising demo worked?
Sure. So participants watch a video, two teams passing basketballs, one in white shirts, one in black.
Mm-hmm.
Your job is simple.
Mm.
Count the passes made by the team in white. Seems straightforward.
Right. But while you're busy counting,
Someone in a full gorilla suit walks right through the middle of the players, thumps their chest a bit, and walks off.
and the punchline.
Get this. About half the people watching were so focused on counting those passes, they completely missed the gorilla.
Didn't see it at all.
Literally did not see it. Two people watching the exact same video, but having fundamentally different visual experiences in that moment.
It's really startling, isn't it? It shows how incredibly selective our attention can be.
And how much our brains filter out even really obvious stuff based on what we're told to focus on.
Exactly. And you have to wonder, how often might we be missing important things? Not because they're hidden, but just because our attention is locked onto something else.
Yeah.
This isn't just some quirky lab finding. It has real implications for, well, everything, relationships, work decisions.
Have you ever had a moment like that, where you were so absorbed you missed something obvious? I know I have.
Oh, definitely. Searching everywhere for your keys, and they're right there on the counter.
Exactly. Or the phone example I used earlier, it really drives home how much our internal state, our focus, shapes what even gets into our
It
awareness.
really does.
So, okay, we've got these unique brains actively shaping reality, filtering based on attention. This leads us to another really fascinating layer. The subjective quality of experience. Philosophers call it qualia, right?
Yes, qualia. It's a great term. It describes that raw, felt quality of our experiences.
Like the specific redness of red. Or the sweetness of sugar, the coolness of water.
Precisely. The what it's like aspect of being conscious. And the tricky thing about qualia is just how private it is, inherently so.
Right. Because we can both look at I don't know, a red apple. We agree, yep, that's red. We use the same word.
We can point to the same swatch on a color chart.
But how can I possibly know if my internal feeling of redness is the same as your internal feeling of redness?
You can't. That's the core of the famous red versus blue thought experiment, isn't it?
Explain that one briefly.
Well, imagine if, maybe due to some crossed wires from birth, your internal experience of what everyone calls red is actually what I experience when I see something we both call blue.
And vice versa. So my blue feels like your red.
Exactly. We'd both learn language correctly. Stop signs are red, the sky is blue. We'd agree perfectly on all the labels.
But our fundamental qualitative inner experiences could be completely inverted.
And we'd never, ever know. There'd be no way to compare those internal states. It's genuinely mind-bending when you think about it.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's mind-blowing. And, the sources we look at, they give some pretty compelling real-world examples of how different perception can be. Like tetrachromacy.
Ah, yes, tetrachromacy. Fascinating stuff. So most of us have 3 types of cone cells, color receptors, in our eyes.
Right. The standard red, green, and blue cones.
But some people, mostly women it seems, actually have 4 types of cone cells.
4. Okay, what does that extra one do?
Well, it seems to allow them to perceive a vastly expanded spectrum of color. It's a dramatic difference.
How dramatic.
So someone with typical vision might distinguish, say, around 1 million different colors, which sounds like a lot.
Yeah, it does.
But a potential tetrachromat, they might be able to distinguish up to 100 million colors.
100 million. I can't even picture that.
Exactly. It's not just seeing more shades, like finer gradations of the reds and greens we see. Some tetrachromats describe seeing entirely new hues, colors we literally don't have words for and can't imagine.
So when a tetrachromat looks at, say, a flower garden, they are seeing a fundamentally different world of color than I am.
Literally. Their visual reality is just exponentially richer, more nuanced in ways that are completely outside our own experience. It really hammers home the subjectivity of color perception.
Wow. Okay. And then there's synesthesia. That's another striking example, right?
Absolutely. Synesthesia is where stimulating one sense automatically triggers an experience in a different, unrelated sense.
So like hearing music and seeing colors.
That's a common one, yes. Or maybe tasting words, or seeing numbers as having specific colors, like the number 5 is always yellow, maybe.
And for the person experiencing it, this isn't just like a metaphor or a strong association.
No, that's the crucial part. For a synesthete, these are genuine, involuntary perceptual experiences. The sound causes the color experience. The word has a taste.
So the sentence, the number 5 is bright yellow, isn't just creative language for them.
Not at all. It's a description of their actual literal perception. It just vividly shows how differently sensory worlds can be wired up from one person to the next.
Okay, so let's recap. We have these unique brains actively generating reality. Our basic sensory experiences, like color or sound, can be fundamentally different for different people.
Right.
It begs the question, how on earth do we ever manage to agree on anything? How do we build any kind of shared reality or understanding?
That is the crucial question, isn't it? It seems like it should be impossible, given the starting point. But somehow, humans have developed some really clever ways to, bridge those perceptual gaps and find common ground.
Okay, like what? What are these tools?
Well, one of the most powerful is definitely the scientific method.
Ah, science. Okay, how does that help with our subjective realities?
Well, the whole point of the scientific method, really, is to try and minimize individual bias and subjective interpretation.
Through things like standardized measurement.
Exactly. Standardized measurements, rigorous statistical analysis, and maybe most importantly, insisting on reproducible results.
Meaning other people have to be able to get the same outcome.
Precisely. Think about something basic, like the boiling point of water. Scientists all over the world using different thermometers, different setups.
They all find it boils at 100 degrees Celsius at sea level.
Right. That consistency creates a practical consensus, a shared reference point we can all work with, regardless of whether my feeling of heat is identical to yours. Science gives us these objective anchors.
That makes a lot of sense. It finds these measurable, repeatable points of agreement outside our personal feelings. Okay, what else? Language must be huge here, too.
Absolutely essential. Language is this incredibly sophisticated tool we have for, Well, attempting to encode and share our internal states with others.
And there's actually brain scan evidence for this, right? Showing similar activity.
Yes, fascinating fMRI studies. They found that when different people listen to the same story being told, their brain activity patterns show surprisingly similar responses,
Really? In what parts of the brain?
particularly in areas involved in language comprehension, understanding the narrative, and even processing the emotional content of the story.
Wow. So even though my internal movie of the story might be unique to me,
The underlying processing of the information seems to follow broadly comparable pathways in different brains.
that's amazing.
It's definitely not a perfect mind meld, obviously, but it strongly suggests that language and narrative do create a substantial foundation for shared understanding.
So when we read the same news report or the same instructions, there's a neurological basis for assuming we're grasping the core meaning in a similar way.
It gives us a strong basis for that assumption, yes, enough to allow for meaningful discussion and collaboration.
Okay. So science and language, these are vital bridges.
Yeah.
But what about when those bridges seem to fail? When people witness the exact same event but come away with completely different stories,
Ah, yes. That brings us neatly to the Rashomon effect.
named after the Kurosawa film.
Exactly. Brilliant film. It shows a single violent incident, but told from the perspectives of four different witnesses.
And each story is totally different.
Dramatically different, yes. And crucially, each version serves the teller's own interests in some way, and each person is absolutely convinced their version is the real truth.
It's such a powerful way to show how our own biases, our motivations, our standpoint just profoundly shapes how we remember and understand things.
And we see this Rashomon effect play out in real life constantly, don't we?
Oh, for sure. Think about car accidents.
Classic example. Multiple witnesses, same crash, but you get very different accounts of speed, who hit whom, the sequence of events.
Right. Or police getting descriptions of a suspect. 10 witnesses might give 10 slightly different descriptions.
Exactly. And it's important to stress this isn't always about people consciously lying.
No, often they genuinely believe their memory is accurate. There was that early study mentioned, wasn't there? About eyewitness reliability.
Yes, way back in 1902. A psychologist named William Stern, he actually staged a kind of dramatic argument during a university class.
And then asked the students to describe what happened.
Yes, and the results were, well, pretty sobering. The average accuracy of their accounts was only about 40%.
Only 40%. That's surprisingly low.
It is. But what's maybe even more telling is that despite this low accuracy, pretty much every student felt highly confident that their memory was correct.
Wow. That really highlights how fallible our perception and memory can be, even for things we think we saw clearly.
It's a good reminder for all of us, isn't it? Don't automatically assume your first impression, your memory, is the whole unbiased truth.
Definitely. And these kinds of perceptual differences, these Rashomon moments, they can have really serious real-world consequences.
They certainly can. In the justice system, for instance, think about wrongful convictions based on eyewitness testimony.
Someone is absolutely certain they saw a particular person, but they're mistaken.
Tragically, yes, it happens. It just underscores how careful we need to be, how much corroborating evidence is needed, rather than relying solely on one person's account.
And even outside of legal cases, just in everyday life, think how often differing perceptions fuel arguments and conflict.
Absolutely. If I'm completely convinced my way of seeing a situation is the only right way, it becomes almost impossible to understand someone else's perspective, doesn't it?
Yeah, it closes you off. Maybe it's worth, pausing sometimes in a disagreement and just wondering, could part of this just be that we're fundamentally perceiving the situation differently?
That's a really valuable reflection. Just acknowledging the potential for different valid perceptions can be a huge step towards maybe a bit more tolerance, more empathy.
A willingness to actually listen to the other side, even if it sounds wrong at first.
Exactly. Now, on a slightly different track, but still related, understanding how the brain constructs reality has also led to some pretty amazing medical breakthroughs.
You mean like with phantom limb pain?
Precisely. Phantom limb pain is such a powerful, if unfortunate, example. People feeling intense, real pain in a limb that isn't physically there anymore.
It shows the sensation is being generated entirely within the brain.
Right. And understanding that the reality of the pain is brain constructed has led to innovative treatments, like mirror therapy.
Where they use a mirror to trick the brain into seeing the missing limb move normally.
Yes, and it can often significantly reduce or even eliminate the phantom pain. It's a fantastic example of how understanding perceptions mechanisms can have real, tangible benefits.
Okay, so if getting a perfectly objective view of reality is maybe impossible, what's a more realistic goal for us? How do we find common ground?
Well, the idea of intersubjective agreement seems much more practical and useful.
Intersubjective agreement. Okay, what does that mean exactly?
It means, essentially, instead of chasing this perfect objective truth that we might never grasp, we focus on achieving a shared understanding that's good enough, a working consensus that lets us coordinate, collaborate, and just navigate life together effectively.
So it's less about seeing the exact same thing and more about agreeing on a way to talk about it and act on it that works for everyone involved.
Pretty much, yes.
Yeah.
The sociologist Alfred Schutz had some great insights here. He talked about it as this sort of ongoing accomplishment of finding common ground.
And how do we accomplish that? What are the ingredients?
Schutz highlighted a few key things. First, and maybe most obviously, shared language. It's our primary tool for even attempting to communicate our experiences and compare them.
Even if my red isn't your red, the word red still works for pointing at the apple.
Exactly. Second, shared cultural frameworks. These give us common reference points, assumptions, social norms. They help us interpret things in broadly similar ways.
Okay, language, culture, what else?
Our ability for empathetic imagination, trying to step into someone else's shoes, conceptually at least, to grasp their perspective even if we can't feel exactly what they feel.
Trying to understand their viewpoint.
Yes. And finally, he stressed practical collaboration focused on shared outcomes, rather than getting bogged down in demanding perfect perceptual alignment on every detail.
That last one feels really important. Focus on the goal, not on whether everyone perceives the path identically.
Precisely. Think about an orchestra playing a symphony.
Okay.
Every musician hears the music slightly differently, right?
Right.
Depending on their instrument, where they're sitting, their own hearing.
The violinist hears something different than the drummer.
For sure. Their subjective sonic experiences are unique, but through the shared language of the musical score, through intense coordination, and focusing on the collective goal, a unified performance.
They create a single piece of music that the audience hears as cohesive.
Exactly. Their different subjective experiences combine, through agreed-upon rules and collaboration, to create a shared artistic reality.
That's a brilliant analogy, really clear.
It shows how intersubjectivity can work in practice.
So, wrapping this up then, the core idea is we each live in this unique brain, shaping a singular reality. Perfect perceptual overlap with anyone else is probably impossible.
That seems to be the case. We're fundamentally bounded by our own consciousness, can't step outside ourselves to check against some universal benchmark.
But maybe thinking about it that way isn't just a limitation. Maybe it's actually freeing.
How so?
Well, it could foster a kind of humility, couldn't it? About how certain we are of our own views. And maybe more curiosity about why others see things differently.
Absolutely. If you truly accept your perception as just one version, not the version, you're likely to approach others with more openness, more empathy.
A greater willingness to actually try and understand their reality, even if it clashes with yours.
Yes. And maybe the most profound reality isn't some objective thing out there we all need to agree on.
But maybe it's found more in the connections we build between our separate consciousnesses.
Exactly. Through language, through art, through science, through compassion. These are the bridges across the gaps.
In the act of reaching out, trying to connect across that gap between minds, maybe that's where the most meaningful shared reality is created.
Beautifully said. That process of connection is the achievement.
So a final thought then, for everyone listening to take away. Even though your world is subtly uniquely yours, different from everyone else's, maybe acknowledging that very difference is the key paradox. It's the thing that actually allows us to get closer to shared understanding.
An interesting paradox, yeah. Own the subjectivity to enable objectivity, or at least intersubjectivity.
Right. So think about how that insight might just subtly change how you interact with people, how you take in information, how you navigate this complex, shared, yet ultimately individual human experience. It's definitely a deep dive worth continuing in your own thoughts.